Hey, welcome to Cinema Gulp. I'm Ben.
And I am Hercule Poirot.
I'm Ben, and he's Hercules Pratt. And it's Murder on the Orient Express on this episode of Tasters. Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Tasters. And today we're comparing the 1974 Sidney Lumet film to the newly released Kenneth Branagh film of the same name. So let's go over quickly what we thought about the original 1974 version of Murder on the Orient Express.
I really enjoyed this movie. I found it to be entertaining. I found the pace of the original 1974 movie is a little slow, but I think it's got a great cast of characters. It is a interesting mystery, but it has its issues at times, and we will talk about how that plays out in both films.
So it's slow, not like a freight train, right? I kind of agree with Mr. Pratt that the 1974 version is slow as shit. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's definitely not going at the speed of a bullet train. What do we think of the new 2017 newly polished, newly revamped version?
I really enjoyed both films. I think they have their differences, but they are very similar films.
I really enjoyed the Kenneth Branagh one too. It had his stamp of filmmaking all over it, whether you like that or don't like that. But I enjoyed it as well. I think both of these movies are good. John, let's start with you. Let's compare these casts.
So, Albert Finney plays Poirot, the star detective in Agatha Christie's novels. Ton of other names in the cast. We got Richard Widmark, who plays Ratchet, or as we heard many times in the film, it sounded like he's being called Rat Shit.
Yeah.
Or I thought...
Mr. Rat Shit.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Even in the new film, it comes across the same. Occasionally, I thought Poirot was saying bat shit occasionally. You've got Anthony Perkins as McQueen. Lauren Bacall plays Mrs. Hubbard. And then you've got other great actors like Jean Gilgood, who is playing a butler character, essentially Hobson, as he's known from the Arthur series.
He was Hobson on a train.
Yeah.
It's like Anthony Perkins was Norman Bates on a train.
Basil Exposition is in the film. Michael York, with not a lot to say, actually. Not a lot of exposition.
Basil.
Hello, Austin.
Jacqueline Bisset, who is beautiful.
Stunning.
There's like a Colonel Mustard character played by James Bond himself, Sean Connery. And he's paired up with Vanessa Redgrave, who I think is a really great actress.
007 on a train.
One of my favorites in the movie is Martin Balsam. And to go along with that, you have the one and only Casablanca's own Ingrid Bergman, and she's playing a racist Swede.
Teaching little brown babies more backward than myself.
And she got an Oscar for that. There's Gary Oldman's Countess Dracula is in the movie.
Madam Butthead.
And her servant or maid is played by Eddie Izzard in drag.
For me, the cast was kind of a toss-up. I thought some people were better in roles than others. I think Anthony Perkins was one of the best characters in the original. There wasn't really anybody in the new one, and I think you even pointed that out, that kind of had that personality. I think Josh Gad was supposed to sort of be his replacement in the new one, and Josh Gad is serviceable. Johnny Depp was surprisingly a way better Ratchet. He was one of the more interesting parts of the film, the way he decided to play the character, which he was in it a little bit more, but I understand why he's not. This is a spoiler review, so we can say he's the one who dies. So he can only really be in so much, if you want to call the movie Murder on the Orient Express.
One of the things they did that's different from the original with his character that I think helps make you hate him even more. Obviously, there's a setup with this kidnapping and murder that he's involved in, but also in the new film, they have him be a dirty art dealer.
And it's kind of funny, too, how he does it. How
Totally.
He kind of reveals what he does is pretty funny.
And so I think that adds...
I sell art. Some of them may not be real necessarily.
Yeah.
The Albert Finney, Kenneth Branagh, those are two drastically different approaches to the character. They keep similarities, they keep some quirkiness, but Albert Finney went with a much more awkward, strange, unapproachable character, where Kenneth Branagh went very suave and went very 007-ish with the charm and the quirkiness. I think Kenneth Branagh carried the movie in the more serious moments that needed to be that way without throwing the viewer off, where Albert Finney, he never broke, and it's very admirable how he played this character, but he never, no matter what happened, sort of changed who he was, where if I have something bad to say about Branagh's performance is that his character does sort of, without real rhyme or reason, change when things get more serious. And Finney played it completely straight the entire way through, where he never broke from that quirkiness.
I think the new cast does a good job. They're not, for me, not personally as memorable in their moments, like not having Penelope Cruz have the same kind of moment that Ingrid Bergman was able to have in the film.
They're all just playing their parts, and they all play them well.
Like
in
a
both
perfect
movies.
example would be William Dafoe, big name,
barely in it,
shown on the poster, but he's one of the ones that is barely in the movie. Really.
Absolutely. So now we're going to get into our second category to compare between the two films, and that's story. John, what did you think about the story of these two films? John.
I can't get any sleep on this train. Are we on a train? I guess not. Well, this is my sleeping outfit to protect my mustache. It's very important. I've got delicate hands, delicate hair, and delicate mustache. I must take care of all of it.
Obviously originated by Agatha Christie novels. She did the murder novels with Scott Perot, the guy that you play. So these stories are told almost the exact same way. I actually do prefer the 1974 version of storytelling, how they give you a prologue of what basically the murder is all about. What's lurking in the background is this murder of Daisy Armstrong, this kidnapping and murder of Daisy Armstrong 5 years prior to when the story starts. This movie decides to give you that information up front with a couple-minute prologue or credit scene, and you know that going in. And I kind of liked that decision a little better than how Branagh decided to sort of pepper in elements of that and make that part of the mystery that you have to figure out. So storytelling-wise, I give the edge a little bit to the 1974 version because I liked having that information up front first. Some may disagree because maybe that adds an extra element of mystery, but there was something interesting about that to me. What did you think about how the story is compared?
Yeah, I agree with you that having that prologue at the beginning of the original one, it helps because as you're learning some of the clues along the way that play into that story, that backstory, you kind of need that information. In the new one, you don't learn it till about halfway through. I think I got to remove this. I think it adds a nice element to the mystery that you're now also kind of figuring out this backstory mystery as well in the new film. But because the movie both films can be kind of confusing with the information they're doling out to you. There's so many characters that you're learning information about. And it's not always like the detective is learning things that he's not necessarily making clear to the audience, and he's moving on. He's got some info that he's not going to share until essentially the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And so I think the original works a bit better having that backstory knowledge, so you can kind of pick up on some of the clues and where they're leading you earlier in the film. And in the new film, they replace that prologue with an action scene, essentially. It's kind of a setup to show you that Perot is the world's greatest detective, and that he has all these means and ways to figure out these cases that nobody else is going to be able to solve. And there's kind of a quick moment in the beginning that shows how good he is, but also it's kind of played up to have a little moment of excitement and action to get the ball rolling at the beginning of the movie.
And I thought that was okay and kind of expected for the 2017 film. Because what it does is instead of giving us that prologue and that backstory on the kidnap and murder, it gives us a little bit more information about Jeremy Perot's character, right? And what you know about his character is that he thinks a completely different way. There's a really kind of beautifully shot moment where a constable is asking him, how did you know? How did you know how to figure that out? And he just says, I see those things. He's like, it's a curse. The way I see the world. I like that because you understand him right off the bat a little bit better than you would the Albert Finney one that just presents him as an eccentric weirdo but never really tells you why.
This is the world's most celebrated crime fighter.
I take a proficient interest in crime.
Yeah, in the new one, it's played a little bit more kind of OCD. He's constantly telling people to straighten their ties. He steps in shit, and he has to step in the shit with the second foot
I do that
even
sometimes.
it out and stuff. They instill that into the character a bit more this time, whereas in the original film, he is just kind of quirky, eccentric, but they do
it
show
works.
It works in the original. There's plenty of scenes that show how his mind works and how he is able to pick up on details that other people don't. In both films, I think they do a good job of showing how the detective's mind works.
Right, and one of the reasons that we do this new series, Tasters, is because we like to compare older films with when they're remade, and they're remade, whether in a good way or a bad way, because we expect things like that. We expect Kenneth Branagh to come in and change. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the opening prologue that talks about the kidnap and murder, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information about the psyche of my character. And it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. I think it works fine here, but I kind of expected that. And I expected a couple of tiny little... I mean, this movie is not an action movie. It's just as much of a talkie as the original one, but it does give you 3 little moments here sprinkled in throughout of a quick little chase. But it's nothing. It's not like some big dragged out action scene. It's just a little tiny little piece to kind of get you a little bit more invested quickly.
To wake up the viewer.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another part of the story which I, in the original one, was not a fan of was how it did not really feel the need to introduce us to characters up front. And I kind of now that I think about it, I kind of admire Lumet for doing that, where you have these big name actors and everyone doesn't get a grand entrance to be introduced as themselves, because you're not seeing the actor, you're supposed to see the character. And Branagh does it in a different way, where he wants everyone to be known first, but he also doesn't say like, boom, 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 here's Daisy Ridley, boom, 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 here's Johnny Depp. It's like, they're still the characters, but when it comes to characters, I felt like I knew who everyone was and that everyone was on board before everything started, whereas the original it kind of like people started just showing up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think we both felt like in the original, when we watched it, we kind of felt like some of the character introductions were screwed up or muddled because you didn't know anything about these people, and we were already kind of into the murder mystery, and there were characters we feel we had never really been introduced properly to.
Right.
And so I think the new one just works in a more modern filmmaking style of making sure that you do at least have some kind of knowledge of who each person is before we get into the heart of the story, the murder mystery, who's going to be murdered and that kind of thing. Every character is pretty well not every character, because I think there's 2 or 3, like the Count, the karate Count, and his wife, played by Michael York in the original and a bunch of nobodies in the new one. Their characters, I didn't even remember them being in the movie until they show up for the final reveal. Like that was just kind of the weirdest.
It's because they weren't in the movie until that.
Yeah, it was like, well,
he
these
comes in
characters
and
the
karate
original,
chops a bunch of people in the beginning. You know, Inspector Clouseau would be like, hey, we got a murder mystery going on. Am I forgetting about a couple of passengers? Oh, yeah, how about the 2 young ones who started a fight in a bar that are in the last car doing drugs?
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
they had something to do with it. I don't know. We're talking story right now. We're comparing the stories, so ending is crucial to that, yeah.
Well, the butler did it. And so did everybody else. Everybody on the train except for the detective and the guy who runs the train.
Right.
And that's kind of that's the twist, I guess, for this, is that every suspect is the murderer. I think that kind of works, especially for its day. That could be considered an original twist.
Well, I mean, you can blame this on the book if you want. I've never read it, but I mean, you have to suspend disbelief in a story as ludicrous as this, where none of these people in the first movie or in the new movie feel invested enough until that moment where they have to. Where it seems a little. Well, it doesn't seem a little. It seems very far-fetched that's where they would decide to do it, and that they all were able to get together to do it. And it just seems like the communication for the time it takes place in would be a very difficult thing to plan something like that from people all over the world. But
yeah.
I mean, again, suspend disbelief. It's a murder mystery.
There are lines in both films where when Poirot is being told he has to take the Orient Express to go to London or whatever, which wasn't his original plan at the beginning of the film, and he's meeting up with the train conductor, the guy who runs the train.
Right.
But in both films, they're like, oh, wait, I can get you on the train, no problem. And then someone's like, oh, no, the train's full in December. And they're like, what's going on? Why is the train full in the middle of winter? So it is kind of set up that the train, all these people, like, they find it odd that all these people have come in the dead of winter to board this train.
Well, and the
take
Orient
this trip.
Express is clearly the world's smallest train, because there's 12 people on board, and for some reason they all have to bunk together.
Yeah, and that's something I found confusing in both films. The train looks bigger than one car, but they keep talking about, well, we need to ask everybody from the Calais car or something, and it's like, there's like 5 cars in this train. I know some of them are the mechanical coal and the engine and this and that, but I feel like there's room for a few more people, or a few more people who even work on the train. There's cooks and things, and none of them are being questioned.
Yeah. I love it when Inspector Jean Dupont says, I am equally as disappointed in you to his bunkmate.
Yes.
And I'm going, really? They all seem to have bunkmates, when in the beginning they're trying to establish, like, oh, give him the first class everything. It's like, wait a minute, so everyone just has a A roomie?
Essentially, it's just whatever they want it to be at the end to say this is what happened. And it still makes sense, and I think both films have the connections that you see it building to that. So it's not like they just made up something at the end. It's all there from the beginning. But I do feel like it's just kind of made up to service this twist that everybody is involved.
Right. And the ending is exactly the same, only he decides, Inspector Clouseau decides to take everyone outside to reveal the mystery instead of just keep them all on the train.
A passenger has died. He was murdered.
The original by Sidney Lumet made some of the greatest movies of all time. I mean, he's got 12 Angry Men, Failsafe, Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, Network, The Wiz. I mean, those are some of the greatest movies ever.
Not to be confused with The Wizard with Fred Savage.
We both pointed out the cinematography sucks in the original. It's all blown out and kind of just hazy. But that goes along with a lot of 70s films that I've seen.
But it's Jeffrey Unsworth who did Superman, the movie, Superman 2, A Space Odyssey, 2001. It's just, you would expect better, I think.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
But I think both films have great production design. I think the train looks really great. The costumes look really great. The period details look great in both movies. But obviously the new film has a more lavish look. Cinematography is modern, beautiful cinematography. Great looking shots in the new film. I'll bring up some of my issues with some of the exteriors later, but I think when they're just doing real, honest-to-God filmmaking, not employing CG, the new one is beautiful. Really looks great.
It is, and I know there's some obvious CG renderings in there, and there's some CG enhancements, but whether that's there or not, as long as it looks beautiful and it's not compromised, because you're right, the new one, to me, is a gorgeous-looking movie. It's full of depth in all the visuals. I really did not like the drawing editing in the original. I just did not like the pacing, and I did not understand the shot selections as far as where people are on the train, where things are taking place. It's almost like your whole movie's on a train. Maybe map that out first so that as the viewer, we know where people are and what the train looks like. This new one, you get this great visual of you kind of know where everything is set up on the train, from the bar car to where they eat to where people's berthings are. The original one, I just didn't get a sense of that, and it has a lot to do with the lack of interesting cinematography and also just poor editing choices, in my opinion. I know that it's, like you said, it's a product of its time, but I've seen better looking films in that time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the original starts off with some really nice exteriors in Istanbul, some real shots, obviously, from the original, no CGI at all. But they make good use of the exteriors for the first 20, 30 minutes while the train is making its first stop along the way. It's leaving the station in Istanbul. It's all beautiful exteriors. They've got a couple shots at night with the train and the steam and stuff like that. But then pretty quickly the story just traps the cinematography inside the train for the rest of the movie. And I do think there's some things they do along the way to still keep it interesting. When you have so many characters, there's moments where they have to be able to move around the room with all these characters and still keep that visually interesting. And for 74, they do some good things, but the new one does a much better job of really being able to capture those moments where you have multiple people and cutting back and forth and finding visually interesting things within the train, like shooting through the windows of the train. There was a scene I mentioned to you I thought created nice like duplicity in some of these characters by showing them through different panes of glass. Obviously more innovative and interesting camera work in the new one, but also some stuff that stood out to us that seemed off-putting and jarring, like why are they choosing this angle to shoot from in the new film?
Right, and as you mentioned, that's Kenneth Branagh's world-famous
Dutch angles.
He loves those Dutch ovens.
And then the one I think that stood out most for us was the reveal of the body when the murder happens.
Awful decision. I don't like bird's eye shots anywhere except for a video game in the 1990s. That's where the only time I want to see the heads of actors is in a porno.
Yeah.
The big reveal of the newly remade one is all shot from a bird's eye at the tops of people's heads, and I hated the way that was shot.
But then like you mentioned, the introduction of the train and kind of Perrault's first, when he's boarding the train, and it's actually a scene that really helps establish a lot of characters as well as the train. It's this one long take, kind of moving along outside of the train, but you can see into the train as he's walking along, and that was kind of the standout long take of the movie. I would say.
Because I think the best shot in the original is that decision to do that long trucking shot. And that's one long take that leads to the departure of the train, and Branagh wanted to match that but do something different. So instead of having Ross Perot walking from the outside for a big long shot, he's got Ross Perot walking on the inside as we look through the windows, and I thought that was a good decision.
Yeah, and in the old one it's kind of a visually interesting departure for the train, but in the new one it's actually doing some storytelling and setting up the location. And that's another thing for the new one that I think they did a really good job. The location of the train, once it's stopped, and in the original film you barely even know why this train is stuck on the tracks. There's a snow drift that has covered the tracks and they have to dig it out. And you barely even see when that happens or kind of feel that moment in the film of, oh, these people are stuck now. The new one obviously makes a big point of this. There is an avalanche scene. Again, another moment that kind of plays into let's have some excitement and kind of almost some action in this movie. There's an avalanche that covers the tracks, strands them on a bridge right in front of a tunnel, and that creates a nice visual setup for all the interviews and the final reveal and all that stuff. To instead of just sticking us in a train car for the rest of the movie, which the original does, you have scenes outside, you have scenes running around on this bridge underneath, you have scenes that take place in the tunnel, and that breaks up the monotony of just being stuck in the train from the original.
Absolutely. If your movie is based and set in a train that's constantly in motion, it makes sense to never leave the train. But this train gets stuck at the end of the first act. So the new one made better decisions as far as having them go outside and get some fresh air. And even Inspector Clouseau, he decides that with a different type of environment, if they take him outside and let him get some fresh air instead of everything just taking place in the same room on the train, I thought it just felt a little more expansive. And through the beautiful technologies of our CGI, you get this avalanche scene that's kind of dimly lit so it doesn't look ridiculous. And it gives us context as to why they stop. I honestly, when I was watching the original, I just blinked, and next thing I knew, the train wasn't moving, and I didn't really know why. So
it just slowly pulls up to a patch of snow and stops. It's not like they run into the snow and have to stop or are derailed. I mean, in the new one, they're slightly derailed. I was like, holy shit, this thing's going over the bridge in the new one. I didn't even know how that avalanche didn't kill everybody.
Both movies surprisingly decided to go with this very Disneyland, welcome to Disneyland, welcome to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride score to start the train ride in what would be considered a montage of the train leaving the station and getting out up into the countryside. When we were watching the first one, we're like, man, this music is really killing whatever tone they might be trying to set for this film. And in the new one, to my surprise, they kind of did the same thing. I was really expecting it to create a sense of mystery and like ooh and doom, maybe with some really creepy sort of like the way what's his name that scored the Hateful Eight?
Ennio Morricone.
Morricone, when that music is so eerie and perfect.
Yeah, especially since the new one, the tone is definitely a bit, it's not dark per se, but it's definitely playing more on that this is a murder mystery set in the snow at night on a train. And the original does play a little bit more comedic. It's never really intense or scary or... once the murder takes place, you never feel like anyone's really in danger from that point in the film. Yeah. In the new one, they establish is somebody maybe out to get Perot at times.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I think the choices for music in the original, it was off-putting the first time we saw it, especially because they ruined a great moment when the train pulls out of the station. They do the train whistle and it sounds like a woman screaming. And then right after that, they go into this like waltz, dance, happy music that just ruins the effect.
Yeah, it was like Wonderworld from Beverly Hills Cop 3.
Wonderworld, fantasy.
Especially in the new one, I think they do a lot to make Johnny Depp, Ratchet's character, be more hated and more despised. And so you're supposed to kind of see it as proper justice that this guy was murdered, and that they all had motives, and nobody was doing it to be evil, essentially. They were doing it to rid the world of evil.
Yes.
So I get that. I think the new one does a better job of making that point. But it's still kind of questionable that the world's greatest detective lets 12 murderers get away with it. That's hard for me to swallow.
And the newer one does do a better job of explaining why, because they give you a little more into who he is, and that he does have a soul, where with the whole line about there's good and there's bad, and that's all there is. And then he gives a line at the end, there's good, there's bad, and then all of a sudden I found out there's also you. And honestly, if I was the world's greatest inspector and 12 people killed the guy who played the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland and ruined Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, I'd let them go too.
Now you have said something accidentally valuable.
Thank you.
The way the Ingrid Bergman scene is handled, it's all one take. And that, I think that's really what helped her get the Oscar, was just they focused right on her face in that scene, and that's it. And just let her amaze you with her acting.
I always felt that when Albert Finney was playing Janusz Poha, he never upstaged the actor, whereas I feel Kenneth Branagh was so committed to being more of a heroic figure. He did kind of, no disrespect to him, he's a good filmmaker, I feel like he did front and center himself a little bit more. Maybe that's why some of this great talent that showed up in this new movie don't get their moments to shine. Am I wrong on that, or did you feel that at all?
No, I think that's a good point. But I also feel that some of the actors in the new film, when given their moment, ham it up a bit too much, especially... what's her name?
Michelle Pfeiffer. Oh, I mean, she was good in the first half, but she got really corny, man.
Like, I think Lauren Bacall does that role so much better.
I agree.
She's always like,
and again, she had more to do.
Yeah, she's supposed to be really annoying. That's one thing they set up with her characters. Everybody's kind of running like cockroaches whenever she comes into a car, because she's so annoying and kind of abrasive and loud and talking about her husbands and things like that.
That she's completely different in this one.
Yeah,
There's people wanting to constantly get to bed with her.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she's Michelle Pfeiffer and she's still really hot.
Yeah, I feel like there's some choices with the acting.
I agree, which
is
weird, because Kenneth Branagh usually makes actors better. That's usually been his thing.
Yeah, all of his Shakespearean work. I mean, he's got amazing actors. Oh, one we didn't talk about that is in his Shakespearean stuff, Derek Jacobi, who plays the Hobson Butler character.
I knew him. Yeah,
he's in Gladiator, but he's in a lot of.
Yes, he's in Gladiator.
He's in a lot of Branagh's
For
Shakespearean.
Rome or for you?
Tom Grex. He's young. I think he could do very well.
For Rome or for you?
And I thought he was really good, and he was another one where they made a change to his character that added a bit more depth. He's dealing with an illness that he's hiding from from Ratchet, and that added a little element to his character that stood out from the original. But I think that the original, like the Hobson character in the original, is more humorous. There's a lot of biting humor, I think, in the original that works better. I think it's like dry British wit, and they're kind of making jabs at each other. The Count Dracula and Lauren Bacall have a couple lines where they're talking about a man in her room, and that's got some biting humor where they're making jabs. And so I just found the original to be funnier from the screenplay standpoint.
Yeah, it was definitely funnier all the way through, and I didn't know a lot about the first one, so starting out, I was like, is this unintentional humor? And then after about 30 minutes, I'm like, oh, this movie's, it's just got that kind of dialogue where it's quirky comedy mixed in with the murder mystery, where at first you're like, is this just really bad? But then it comes into play, and you're like, oh, no, it's just brilliantly delivered.
Yeah, I think the whole screenplay is brilliant. I think almost every line in the original, I'd love to see the new one again to kind of decipher a bit more of the dialogue and how it plays into things, because the original, I think every line is working to either deceive you or decipher this mystery. I don't think there's a wasted line of dialogue in the original film.
And I have never read the book, but it's definitely a very tight script for having come from an Agatha Christie book, I'm assuming. I always thought Agatha Christie was a cracker, like a type of cracker for many years. I didn't really realize that it was an author. Let me ask you something. When Josh Gad falls into the snow and lays down on it, did you start singing "Do You Want to Build a Snowman" in your head?
Do you want to build a snowman?
So, Inspector LeFew, let me ask you something. Are you on duty right now?
Oh, I can have a drink with you. No problem.
because I'm having PBR, which actually has been around since about 100 years before the Orient Express takes place.
If I know how to drink through my mustache, I will.
Yeah, good luck with that.
It's getting very wet.
For me, I literally have to give this a tie. I think both casts are great. I think people are used better in certain ones. I really couldn't pin down which one I think is better. I know there's more Oscar winners in the original one, but that's also 30-something years from ago where Oscars were looking at different types of things.
For me, the original stands out as the better cast. I really
Fair
like.
enough.
I just think Albert Finney's commitment to playing Poirot, his look and everything, the Uncle Fester no neck look that he pulls off, it's just, I don't know, I just found him fascinating.
I'll give you that. And if I broke down character for character, cast for cast, yeah, Finney wins over Branagh, where I say people like Depp wins over the other
wins
guy.
over Vidmark.
Pfeiffer loses, Josh
Bacall,
Gad loses to
yeah.
Anthony Perkins. I mean, if you do it that way, yeah, but I have a hard time, so that's why I go tie.
So Martin Balsam's character, I think, is key. He brings a lot of humor to the role, and that's really missing in the new film. And then the doctor character that's not even really in it. The playback between those two, there's some really funny dialogue, and just they help Poirot along the way, so he's not the only one in all of these interrogation scenes. And that's another thing I found.
That was Branagh saying it's the Kenneth show.
Because in the original, each time someone comes in for the interrogation, it's their moment to shine as well. And in the new film, some of the interrogations are broken up into a montage where you see 2 or 3 of them take place all at the same time. And I don't think you can focus on what's happening in those scenes as easily as in the original.
That's true.
And so I prefer the cast of the original, but I would also say moving into like story and screenplay, I really prefer the original on that as well.
As far as story.
Yeah. Well, story's so similar in both, so it's kind of, they're both the same.
I think what we have to break it down to, because they're so similar in story, is how was the story told? And I go with the original on that one because of what I mentioned earlier. I do like the prologue a lot, and it gives you some subtext, if that's the word I'm looking for. It gives you something lurking in the background that kind of has plagued a situation, and you're not sure how it plays into things yet. Where if you're going to the new one cold, you don't even know about the murders or the kidnapping. So I feel, having seen the original one and then watching this one, I think if I had just seen this new one, I would have been lost in that regard.
I agree. I think we really benefited from being able to see the original.
Yeah, because I would not know what kidnapping they were talking about.
Well, I was wondering if it was going to be different because they hadn't established the kidnapping right from the start. I was wondering if, is there a different crime that set all this off?
And I like it that he changed it. He didn't want to do the same type of movie, but they didn't. There was a moment of exposition, but there wasn't really a big reveal of. There wasn't a conversation between two people about the kidnapping and murder. So, excuse me. That's just going to happen, folks. So moving on to filmmaking, the final category. This is an easy one for me. If you've been watching this, you understand that there's aspects of the original movie, filmmaking-wise, I did not care for, like editing, and I think there was a great cinematographer, and Unsworth kind of wasted in this movie, with the exception of a few shots. So I go with the 2017 version as far as filmmaking goes. It was gorgeous. It was easy to follow, and that was through seamless editing. It doesn't need to be beautiful or stand out editing. It needs to be seamless, which means you do not even notice it. And that's what this movie had. And this movie had really good looking CGI renderings that did not take me out of the movie. I saw them, but I did not think they took me out. And Branham's got a weird sense for, his eye is hit or miss with me. It really is. Sometimes it can seem very generic, and sometimes it can seem very he's trying too hard to push things, and I don't know if that always works. I think you should just entrust in his cinematographer sometimes. But I'd say by quite a big margin, I like the filmmaking of the first one. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit torn on the filmmaking, which one I would choose. I think obviously the modernization of the new film, it looks better, the editing's better, it doesn't become as stagnant in terms of the shot selection, but there are also some odd shot selections in the film that we pointed out. So I would have to say I would lean towards at least things like production design, costume, just the lavish look, the setting, putting it on that bridge with the avalanche. Some of those changes to the new film certainly stand out and make it a more enjoyable film for me than the original. But really what it comes down to is cast and screenplay. Those two things are so strong, I think, in the original that I lean towards those on the original. But I'd say filmmaking, the new one does beat the original just because it's modernization.
Yeah, it's not saying it's more innovative. It's a new product of its new shiny polished time.
Yeah.
The train is more polished. The outside looks more realized, and that could just be the times.
And movie making is a visual storytelling, so the visual side of it certainly works better, I'd say.
I want to say maybe the original has the slight edge because you had 2 for the original and 1 for the new one, where I had 1 for the original, 1 for the new, and a tie. So technically, 1974 version gets a golfer's clap for winning in the end. Cheers to that. Yeah,
cheers.
Here's to the best family, and here's to Inspector Clouseau. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, detecting murders and all that shit to come out here. And,
I just want to go on a vacation. Can I just get some sleep now? What the hell is all this?
As always, if you like this review, please click like and or subscribe today. You can leave some comments down in the comments section below. Where can they find us, John?
They can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and we got rid of Tumblr. We don't need that. Look for us at Cinema Gulp. For Cinema Gulp, this has been Hercule Poirot.
And this has been We Drink Your Cinema.
I drink it up!
Make good